it's really three parts. The first part is research. Even if it's a science fiction film or a fantasy film, I'll do a lot of research. That's reading books, interviewing people, all sorts of things. I usually do that for at least a month if I can. Just try to absorb as much information as possible.
Well, I tend to research a lot, so I mean quite often I'll choose a project because it's something I'm interested in, and I'll buy 20, 30 books from Amazon or from a bookshop and just completely immerse myself in that world first.
I think the first rule of screenwriting for me is that I never have an idea for a screenplay and then just write it. So I always live with the ideas I've had for a long time.
There's a long period before I write anything down. That's usually driven by character. Just somebody I'm thinking about, a situation I'm thinking about. It's often a central conflict a person has with another person, a situation, you know, that will root around there for a long time.
I mean, you start with a spark. You start with some idea that seems like it might go someplace, and I play with it. The analog really is very much to a painter, or I sketch. I sit at the computer and I play with an idea that interests me.
Then I do cards. In the old days, I literally used to write down ideas for scenes, you know, on an index card, and I would color code them for different characters and put them on a cork board.
Then I tend to do a card system where I'll read the book and break it down, because I tend to do adaptations a lot.
I remember when I was doing Warhorse, I had like 3 bits of information: the whole breakdown of the book, the breakdown of the screenplay that Lee Hall had originally written, and the breakdown of the stage play, and there was lots of card work.
But now there's a variety of programs that I use. I use one on my iPad, and it just emulates the old cards, and you can drag and drop them, and that's just a little easier.
Suddenly, I've got something that's starting to resemble a story, and then I see where the holes are, and then I start writing dialogue, and then I write more cards.
And then for the cards, I go to an outline.
My outlines are worthless, though. I'll get about a quarter of the way into a script and realize the rest of the outline is worthless, and I have to just sort of pick my way forward. My ultimate destination rarely changes that dramatically. I usually know where I'm heading. It's a bit like a road trip. Like, you know where you're starting, you know where you're ending, and you think you know what cities you're going to visit along the way.
I do work from an outline as long as possible, but based on the theory that to screw up an outline is less heartbreaking than to screw up a screenplay. And somehow I like to hold off writing a screenplay for as long as possible.
And typically, I guess for a film, the outline will be anywhere from 20 to 30 pages, and that's usually the most exhaustive, sort of, you know, depressing part, because that's where you actually have to figure out A to B to C what comes next. And from the outline, I go to script.
Do I have a method for developing characters? If I can hear their voices, I don't mean that to sound pretentious, but either I can or I can't hear someone's voice. And if I can hear their voice, then I can talk in their voice in my head. And as soon as I have that, then I can find a way in.
I know that some writers will sit down and they will write kind of character biographies or things like that, and I don't do that. I start through plot in terms of who they are and what they're doing, and then inevitably what happens while I'm writing the script, the character kind of, you know, bubbles to the surface. And then quite a few times I'll end up changing the plot based on having discovered the character, and I'll realize, oh, I'm not sure the character would do that, so now I have to go back and change that.
I think you start off knowing them quite well, but also with each draft you get to know them better. So dialogue for me in the first few drafts tends to be a little bit of a discovery of the character. So the character will tend to over-talk, and then with each draft they talk less and less because I sort of know them better, and I don't need to discover them through the dialogue.
I mean, my main writing trick is that I just write an enormous amount. So if I've decided that someone has a sister and that sister's going to be a key part of it, I will write 20 pages of him talking to his sister, and the relationship between them and the characters of them will slowly emerge during the course of the day, and then I read it back and think, oh, there, I came across something interesting. When I start tomorrow, that'll be my starting point.
I'm writing, sketching all the time, and most of the sketching is dialogue. And the reason I'm sketching that way is because I want the characters to rise. I mean, the characters have to, you know, writers always talk about the characters taking over their story or taking over the film, and it really is true. You really they need to come alive. The movie is going to be about them.
This will sound very touchy-feely, but I meditate. I do Transcendental Meditation every morning for about 20 minutes, and that kind of centers me. And then I'm a big tea drinker, so I think a lot of writers have their sort of process or their rituals, and so mine every morning is I meditate and then I make green tea.
You know what I do? I try to do things that require very, very little attention. I find grocery shopping is excellent, honestly, because you can go through the market, you know where to get, you know, the cornflakes, and that you know, so you're doing something. You're not looking at it directly. But it doesn't take so much concentration that it distracts you. I have had more things figured out in the aisles of the supermarket or gardening.
Having baths is helpful. Listening to pop music is something I do hugely. Sometimes walking. I mean, I know all the plots of Love Actually I thought up while I was walking along, as I had a damaged back and I had to walk a lot, and I thought of all those stories without writing anything down.
My own personal rhythms are that I write early in the morning. So anything else, and I write pretty much every day.
I get up kind of ridiculously early. I start working around 4:30 in the morning.
My writing kind of habit is that I generally start at about 7:30 in the morning and knock off at about 2.
There's almost nothing of any use that I do after midday.
But if I get a couple of hours of work done, kind of in that dark time when nobody else in the world is awake, I find that I can sink in deep enough to it that I can pop up and do life things and then concentrate again. And then I usually work until, 2 in the afternoon, take a little break. Depends on how much I've done. I may work some more in the evening.
During the afternoon, what I'll do is, again, I'll go back to the research. I'll either read, prepare for the next scene, or I'll watch lots of movies that are connected to what I'm writing. And so I sort of keep in that zone as much as I can.
And the more kind of ritualistic it becomes, and the more it's like a muscle that you exercise, the easier it becomes to write.